right, everybody. Welcome here to show 168 on Crypto Voices. Matthew Mezinskis, your host here from Eastern Europe, joined here by my co-host, Michel, Keto Miner from Nodl. What's going on, Michel?
Hey guys, what's up?
Not too much, buddy. And very happy today to introduce our special guest from Trezor and Satoshi Labs and Trezor Academy, Josef Tětek. Josef, how you doing?
Hey, happy to be here.
Actually, did I get your last name right? I've never asked you about that.
Yeah, that's hard to pronounce. It's Tětek with a soft T at the beginning.
Tětek.
T-E with a hook,
Yeah.
like the Czech special symbol, so it's Tětek.
That's a tough one, actually, for me, even with our somewhat shared. I believe it was the Czechs.
It is a tough one even for Czechs.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Czech.
It's an unusual name.
The Czech alphabet, the Czech language, is actually used in the Latvian and Lithuanian alphabet as well. I mean, that's
Nice.
it was taken from your guys' adaptation. But anyway, also great to have you on as a fellow free marketeer, as most Bitcoiners are, Austrian. I didn't mention founder of the Mises Institute of Czechs and Slovakia. That was when did you found that? 2000?
Well, yeah, that's a long history now. That was, I believe, 2010. And the Czech and Slovak Mises Institute then merged with the Liberal Institute, like a classical liberal institute that we have running here since 1989. And for a couple of years, around 2010, the Liberal Institute was sort of inactive. So me and some other students from the University of Economics decided to found like a sort of substitute institute for the Liberal Institute. That's how the Czech and Slovak Mises Institute came about. But now it's merged back with the Liberal Institute, and yeah, still a lot of interesting books being published by that. And I'm to a large extent not that much involved in like the general free market stuff anymore. I am a libertarian, but I'm not involved in like
Yeah.
political philosophy stuff anymore. I just focus on Bitcoin now.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way to be. It keeps things simple. And
Yeah.
perhaps we'll get into some of the geopolitical craziness that surrounds Central and Eastern Europe today. But regardless, it's a good way to be. I fully understand you. I think a lot of change for the good can be done just immersing yourself into Bitcoin. Top level question for you, because, I love working with you guys. I've just, met you at the offices last year at BTC Prague. Obviously, BTC Prague #2 coming up very, very soon. But you guys at Trezor have a lot of different companies, initiatives, Trezor Academy, which I mentioned. You have Vexel, you have Tropic Square. Can you just give us a high level overview of all the great things that the people at Trezor are doing these days?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, let me take it from the top. So there's the Satoshi Labs holding, which has 4 companies under it. The company number 1 historically has been Trezor. So Trezor, the world's first hardware wallet. Trezor Model 1 still useful to this day, which is amazing in terms of retail electronics, that you can actually still use a device from 2013 and it works just as perfectly as 10 years ago. Yeah, many new devices coming out last and this year. And also the physical backups. I'm very happy we are finally doing like the physical metal backups for the recovery seeds in-house. I think that's a very good design of what we've done with the Trezor Keep Metal. Besides Trezor, there is Invity, which is sort of an exchange aggregator when you work in the Trezor Suite environment, so that users can buy and sell Bitcoin or the other coins straight from the environment, from the companion app. Then we have the Tropic Square, as you mentioned. The Tropic Square, its aim is to develop a fully transparent secure element chip, because the secure element chips, not just in hardware wallets, but in other devices like mobile phones, they may be secure, but they are not transparent and auditable. So it's sort of like a security through obscurity. But the basic tenet of Trezor and Satoshi Labs has always been to be as open as possible, so that many eyes can discover the bugs and we can fix them. So the idea with the Tropic Square chip is to roll out the world's first transparent secure element for the use in hardware wallets and other devices as well. And the company is getting quite close to achieving that goal. I don't have a specific roadmap right now, but it is on a good track. And then the fourth company is Vexel. That's the non-KYC peer-to-peer sort of social network for people to discover the counterparties for buying, selling Bitcoin, but not just Bitcoin. It's a full-fledged marketplace now, especially in Czech Republic, where it's from. So people are, for example, offering farmers produce, like organic food. People are offering services. So the Vexel app had to roll out like categories recently because it's become quite a mess, because you're looking to buy Bitcoin from someone in your local town in person for cash, fully privately, and you constantly see like these offers that somebody is selling something else. So it's a full-fledged marketplace now, especially Czech Republic, Slovakia, but it has been spreading to other countries as well. And then as part of Trezor, we have the Trezor Academy. It's not a company by itself. It's an initiative, a non-profit initiative by Trezor that's focused on Bitcoin and Bitcoin-only education in the global south, mostly Africa. And that's what I've been focusing for the past 12 to 8 months now.
Excellent. Yeah, I would like to continue to drill down on each of those entities and initiatives in future shows, but let's just focus in on Trezor Academy then. You've been doing a lot of traveling, I believe. Where have your travels taken you in recent months?
Yeah, so recently, in terms of Africa, in December, there was an Africa Bitcoin conference. It's become one of my favorite events. It's been the second one. And the ABC, the Africa Bitcoin Conference, is very special because in 2022, it was the first Pan-African Bitcoin and Bitcoin-only conference on the continent. Until then, there wasn't that much going on in Africa. So big shout out to Human Rights Foundation, which is the main sponsor for that conference. And yeah, so last year in December, there was the second year of Africa Bitcoin Conference. We were there with the Trezor Academy. We actually rolled out like a Bitcoin car for the West African region. It's called Bitcoineta West Africa. There are now multiple Bitcoin cars called Bitcoinetas around the world, like spreading the Bitcoin world. And yeah, so that one was really amazing. Really enjoyed that one. Met a lot of brilliant people from Africa. That's what I always look for, to like local Bitcoin organizers, mostly from Africa, so that we can cooperate with them on the Trezor Academy program. And then I went to Cape Town, Adopting Bitcoin Cape Town in South Africa. That was basically the second major Bitcoin conference on the continent. So very happy I went there. I had a chance to visit Bitcoin Academy. I've been following Herman Vivier and what he does in Bitcoin Academy for a couple of years now. So very happy to finally be there. Also Bitcoin Witsand in South Africa, a very different circular economy from Bitcoin Academy, but also very, very special and very, very nice to visit that. Then in terms of Africa, I also went to Ethiopia to visit the local mining initiative in there. It looks like Bitcoin mining in Ethiopia is going to, or is already picking up quite heavily because they just finished, I believe it's the Africa's largest hydroelectric power plant,
Mm.
the Grand Renaissance Ethiopian Dam, or something like that. Um, and one interesting stat about Ethiopia is around 95% of its electricity generation comes from hydropower. It's not all very well interconnected, both within the country and to the neighboring countries. So that's the very environment that Bitcoin miners are looking for. A lot of stranded energy, a lot of energy generation, but not too well connected to the consumers. So Bitcoin miners can come in, set up their operations, and mine for cheap, and basically export the energy from the country without having to be connected through a grid. It's actually very elegant how some countries can export their energy, and a lot of countries in Africa have a lot of surplus energy. So yeah, that was very interesting coming to Ethiopia and seeing that, and also talking to some of the local bankers that are considering investing in the space. So yeah, definitely a place to watch. And then yeah, there were a couple of like regular Bitcoin conferences like Madeira, and just at this point, I'm preparing to go to Oslo for the Oslo Freedom Forum, also a Human Rights Foundation conference that I really enjoy.
Yeah, indeed. It's a wonderful time of year when you have some great conferences and, coming off the back of some really good ones in Africa as well. I'm sure it's very rewarding. Um, just sticking on the topic of Africa in particular, let's start with mining. Are there any other stats or little tidbits or stories that you learned which are, I think, quite um, helpful in promoting the idea of how Bitcoin is actually helping people here who may not have access to some of the resources that many of us not in the global south take advantage of?
Yeah, so in terms of mining specifically, really nice or two nice projects to watch are Gridless from Kenya, um, which the idea is basically in the name. There's a lot of electricity generation across Africa that is not connected to the grid. So what Bitcoin miners do is set up the mining operations, usually in the form of a container full of the ASIC miners right next to the power plant. And they basically allow the power plant to run on um, on a full basically output, meaning the power plant owner or manager gets much more revenue than if like it was sort of jumping around the demand for the power. And then in turn, that allows the power plant to get connected to the grid and get the other customers for the electricity. So that's sort of what Gridless has been doing around Africa recently, as far as I understand the project. I'm not that deep into mining, but that's just what I see from in encountering like people like Eric from Gridless. Also interesting, and Gridless is part of that, is the GAMA. It's the Green Africa Mining Association, which is an association that interconnects the mining initiatives across Africa. And yeah, it has the word green in the name because most of the stranded energy in Africa is coming from renewables. Usually it's hydropower. So yeah, it's a very interesting space to watch. And as I said, it basically allows the countries to export their energy very easily without any hassle, and the hardest currency can come in, Bitcoin, to the country. Or of course, they can interchange it into dollars. So that's usually what a lot of African countries are after, the dollar. Yeah.
Do you know how they solve the internet connectivity problem in these regions? Because recently we had some pretty big fiber cuts of the fibers around Africa. And I know Sebastian Guspiu is using Starlink, which they buy in a country where it's working and then move it to the country in which it's not supposed to work but works anyway. So maybe you can tell us.
Yeah. That's a great question, because that's precisely what I was asking when we visited the Ethiopian mining operation. And so these guys, they had the fiber. Then there was a GSM module if the fiber went down, or there were actually maybe two fiber links. Then there was a GSM, and then there was a satellite. So it was basically triple connectivities, and it never happened so far that all of them went down at the same point. So usually this is what the miners take special care for, to have multiple connections. If it were like really stranded regions somewhere in the mountain, then probably the fiber wouldn't be accessible. Then hopefully it would have at least GSM and the satellite, or just the satellite itself.
And what about maintenance? Like, do they just dispose of the miners that are down, or they have some local technicians do the maintenance?
Yeah, so in Ethiopia, what I've heard is the mining project, they are bringing in a technician that has been working for a couple of years in Kazakhstan on their mining farm. So they are bringing an experienced guy that will maintain the ASICs. And of course, if it totally goes down, then the ASICs need to be replaced as quickly as possible. But that's maybe just too deep into the mining operations for me, because I'm just really selling what I heard and seen like for a couple of days when I was there. But it's a space that I haven't been too familiar with so far. But it's really amazing to see how sophisticated it has become, the Bitcoin mining side. And the cost effectivity of it all, where everything basically matters, where you source the ASICs from, how quickly you can get them on the site, the electricity cost, of course, as well, the maintenance, and also the stability of the region, because these are multi-million-dollar operations usually. So you want to make sure this is going to remain viable for at least a couple of years. And also go on.
Since they're operating mostly near dams, do they use water cooling? Because they have like a big reservoir of fresh water. So
that depends on the country. And what I found out in terms of Ethiopia, it's a very good country to mine Bitcoin, because the temperatures are quite mild. It's 20 to 25 degrees Celsius all year round. So they don't need to use the water cooling. They are just air cooled. And also, as compared to, for example, Paraguay, there's not too much dust in the air. So the air cooling works pretty well in that. And compared to, for example, Texas, the temperatures don't climb as high in the summer, so we don't need the more sophisticated water cooling. So Ethiopia is also interesting for miners because of its mild temperature all year round. So that's, for example, one thing that I didn't consider at all, that can be important for miners.
Yeah, when you think about Africa, I think like deserts and high temperatures everywhere, and it's not the case.
Yeah, not the case with Ethiopia. It's it's actually it's a real tangent, but one theory is that the Garden of Eden described in the Bible is actually like one specific valley in Ethiopia, because Ethiopia is most likely the place where humans originate from. And it has the it's the perfect environment for humans, basically. And the Garden of Eden is probably somewhere in Ethiopia.
Nice. Very nice. That's very interesting. Moving maybe away from the technical part a little bit, I'm sharing a screen for our video viewers here of Trezor Academy. Scrolling down now, you can see you have a lot of meetups all around Africa and Venezuela, South America as well, past meetups. Thoughts?
Right. So to put it into perspective, the Trezor Academy, we started doing the first Bitcoin meetups in Africa in February, or no, it was April 23, so roughly a year ago. The initial focus was just Africa. Now we run some programs in Indonesia, Mexico, and Venezuela. And the general idea is I'm looking for Bitcoin educators, for example, from Burundi. And when I find someone that is eager to teach other people about Bitcoin and is able to organize the group together, book a venue, and actually perform the teaching, then we support the sponsor with some financial and material resources. The curriculum is done by me. It's about 70 slides. We will publish them. I believe when this podcast will come out, it will be on this web page. It will be published. It's Bitcoin only, some self-custody angle, but not necessarily putting it too much or pushing it too much on the students, because especially in Africa, custody Lightning wallets like Wallet of Satoshi or Blink are very important and very widespread, and it actually makes a lot of sense. You don't want to do on-chain transactions if you have like $5-10 in Bitcoin. But there is a strong self-custody explanation that you should progress towards self-custody as you go on. And yeah, in some places, the Bitcoin Trezor Academy has been doing very well. We found some very brilliant organizers, especially big shout out to the Burundi and Uganda teams. They are doing brilliant jobs. And so far, around 400 people have gone through these programs. It's in-person, face-to-face meetups, 3 meetups. It's a series of 3 meetups for each program for around 20 to 30 people. And that's the model that I found works best for real sticky Bitcoin education. It's the model that worked for me. It's the model that works for across Europe in terms of 21 and 21 meetups. Yeah, there's a lot of digital courses and podcasts, books, and stuff. But that's usually for, let's say, the advanced Bitcoiners who want to just expand their knowledge. For newcomers, you need somebody to answer the questions. You need somebody to just help you set up the wallet, understand how the wallet backup works, try to send some sets in between each other, and that's when it really clicks. And that usually happens at these physical meetups.
Yeah, so many questions here to follow up on. Firstly, and this is a topic I haven't talked about in a long time, but when you say Bitcoin only, and you're talking with a group of people who I can imagine volatility is quite important, that is not having such volatility with their savings, I can imagine Bitcoin only makes a lot of sense, but I'm not sure. I mean, how does it go when you say Bitcoin only in some of these workshops or meetups? Is there a decent sized contingent that fully is on board with that, or some people are still trying to trade scam coins and stuff?
Yeah, so the idea behind Bitcoin only is to warn people against scams, against like volatile altcoins. Not to warn them, let's say, against the stable coins or the stable sets, for example, as the Blink wallet has inside. I think like stable coins and stable sets have their place in places like Africa, and people tend to use this. That's also why I like to recommend the Blink wallet more than Wallet of Satoshi nowadays because of this stable sets element inside. Which is very elegant. It's a sort of like a stable coin without a token. Yeah, so we don't necessarily want to steer people away from stable coins, but from the scams and old coins where they would be burned. You usually won't get burned, especially in the short term with stable coins. So nothing against like normal everyday usage of stablecoins in places like these. I totally understand that the Bitcoin volatility can be too much for people. And like in a sense, in places like Africa, in many countries in Africa, there's not a strong savings culture. First, because people are in general quite poor in many places, and so they don't have that much to save. And second, because they have they have no good instrument to save in. The fiat currencies in Africa are usually an absolute trash. It would be very unwise to save, for example, in Nigerian naira or multiple other currencies. So people
I
don't.
follow the black market rate with the naira as one of the
Yeah,
monetary based ones. It's incredible to see. Sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
yeah, it just reached the SATS parity right now. One Bitcoin is 100 million Nigerian naira right now. So
Wow.
you don't want to save in that. Uh, so part of the Trezor Academy is actually like general financial literacy, that it's a good idea to build up some savings, but not not necessarily in your own national currency, because that doesn't make sense in Africa, especially. So yeah, like part of the curriculum is just explaining why it makes sense to save some purchasing power in sound money, in Bitcoin. Uh, with, of course, the understanding that it might be just a couple of dollars here and there. So that's why the custodial Lightning wallets as the first touch point make sense in this environment. The other quite interesting or important element of this type of education is digital literacy as well. People tend to have phones, um, smartphones in some places, also quite a lot, dumb phones in many places. Um, and It's interesting to, for example, find out that people don't really understand how email works, how you can back up like the wallet with just your email account. So we need to explain in some places like basic digital literacy, stuff like that, how to keep stuff secret if you have like some passwords, some pins that you need to keep it secret. Yeah, so financial and digital literacy and some privacy security literacy is quite an interesting part of that. Also depends on the country, of course. In major cities like Cape Town, you would have like a higher literacy like that. But in, for example, townships in South Africa, there are some elements that you need to explain first. Yeah, and yeah, now I totally forgot what was the original question.
How many people do you typically see in these meetups?
Yeah, so it's roughly 20 to 30 people per program, per
Oh, not
meetup,
bad.
because that's usually the sweet spot for both the venue, because in some places it's just a restaurant or some small place like that, so you don't want 50 to 100 people, and also for everybody to have a chance to ask questions, to get some prize. We provide like some t-shirts and camera blinders and stuff like that. So yeah, 20 to 30 people is like the sweet spot for these in-person meetups.
Yeah, and you kind of already touched that subject, but yeah, one question was about smartphone adoption because I stayed with the idea that most of Africa is using like old Nokias and that not necessarily have even internet on their phones. They must use text message even for payments. So do you have like some local, let's say, exchange systems that can use these old school payment SMS systems for
Yeah,
Bitcoin
yeah.
or?
So one of the interesting facts about Africa is more people have phones with an internet connection than bank accounts. So still, like the phone with an internet is more accessible to an average African than a bank account. Um, in terms of smartphone penetration, depends on the country, but it's not as bad. In some places, it's more than 50% of the population have a smartphone. Like it's not the latest iPhone, but it's still like an Android phone that's capable of having app like a Blink Wallet or Wallet of Satoshi. Um, but yeah, there are countries and communities like the townships where you have mostly the dumb phones, or as it's called, the feature phone. And one of the most interesting projects that came out of Africa recently is Machankura. Like it's from 2 or 3 years ago. And Machankura is a way for people with feature phones, with the dumb phones, to send and receive Lightning payments. It's a custodial project. It's run on a server somewhere. So sort of like a wallet of Satoshi, but it opens up like a beautiful world of digital payments for people that would otherwise never have the chance to have anything like that. Because if you have only a feature phone, not even a smartphone, it's very likely you won't have a bank account as well. You up until now needed to use cash only. And one of the interesting things about Africa and South Africa in general is cash is quite risky to carry around because there's a huge crime on the rise in recent years, especially in the poorer regions, in the townships. So if you carry around cash, you're you're likely to get mugged. So it's interesting that in South Africa you can see a lot of shops that are digital only, card payments only, or card and Bitcoin now. There's quite a lot of Bitcoin adoption in South Africa precisely of this cash problem because neither the customers nor the cashier, the merchant, want to have cash on hand because you're likely to get mugged. So now Lightning is getting quite a huge traction in South Africa, even in the townships. Like Bitcoineta West was the first one that kicked things off, but it's spreading because it serves a very valuable use case in terms of personal security. So yeah, and people tend to use the Machankura on their feature phones. You can also use it on a smartphone through WhatsApp. It's basically like a WhatsApp chat, and you can open an account on that. And yeah, it works like magic. If you show it to like the locals, it usually clicks like that because it's a bank account that they otherwise wouldn't be able to have. The volatility, yeah, that might be a problem, but it's not as big a problem as we might imagine because for some people they just need to have some balance on hand for just a couple of days, and usually Bitcoin's volatility isn't that high within like a couple of days span. You might have some bad days when it drops like 10-20% within a week. But still, you're in an environment where the fiat currencies are devaluing also on a fast pace. Maybe not South Africa, but many other places. So yeah, stuff like Machankura really makes a difference in places like this.
Yeah, and we mentioned Vexel before. Wouldn't that also be a good candidate to use on such a market?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's what you asked basically is the second part of the question, which I ignore for now. So you can actually use Lightning on even the dumb phones, and the question where you source the Bitcoin from, Vexel hopefully will become part of the answer soon. We have implemented the Vexel education into the Trezor Academy curriculum in the past couple of months. In Namibia, it is starting to take off. Shout out to Oken from Namibia. He's been very excited about running the Trezor Academy and spreading the Vexel around. So that's very exciting. Otherwise, there's quite a lot of exchanges actually on the continent. There's Yellow Card, there's Bitnap, Binance as well. So yeah, people can have an exchange account rather than a bank account. It's easier for Africans to have an account on some of the exchanges than with the bank. Yeah, otherwise we are always spreading the idea that you can earn Bitcoin worldwide. It might be like very life-changing for example, a designer from Uganda to open up his earnings potential to people from Europe and stuff. There's merchant adoption picking up in multiple places. Yeah, and hopefully the non-KYC peer-to-peer will pick up, especially in some countries. Bitcoin is either illegal or frowned upon, and you don't know what you're up against. Sometimes it can change quite quickly. In Nigeria, the government is very hostile to everything connecting Bitcoin and exchange. So stuff like Vexel, where there are no identities, there's no registration, it's purely peer-to-peer, that can really make a difference in countries like that.
Are you also using Peach? I know it's kind of a competitor to Vexel in a way, but they are present on many markets with Cash and.
Yeah, personally, I have never used it. I don't think it's actually a competitor because Vexel isn't a for-profit business, so it's like a public good, sort of like Signal or BTC Pay, where the company just puts it out there and hopes for people to use it, but there is no actual business behind it. So yeah, kudos to Peach or No Ones that are doing like a for-profit side of that. But like the purely non-profit open source model is probably the most resilient.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, doesn't have to be too deep, just generally what you've been seeing, like percentage-wise. You mentioned self-custody, how you talk about that a little bit, but mostly, I think it's mostly, you're probably dealing with some custodial or Lightning custodial solutions as far as spending power for these communities. Do you have a rough split on that? Is it, I don't know, 90-10? And when I mean 90% custodial, 10% people are really interested in non-custodial solutions or something like that. Taking a moment to remind you that this show is brought to you by Trezor, home of the original Bitcoin hardware wallet. For over 10 years now, Trezor means business in Bitcoin security and functionality. When using their wallet software Trezor Suite to connect to the Bitcoin network, you're automatically connected via Tor, protecting your identity and giving you full control of your coins in a fully open source manner, both on the software level and on the hardware level. So head on over to Trezor.io to grab your Trezor Safe 3 with a secure element, Model T with a touchscreen, or the original Trezor 1, as well as a ton of available accessories to back up your keys and keep your coins safe. This show is proud to be associated with Trezor.
Yeah, I would say it's probably even higher. So for Trezor as a company, we see some sales in Africa. It's mostly South Africa, Kenya, used to be Nigeria. Not sure how it is now because it's a troublesome country to get devices in. Otherwise, not too much, and even in those major countries, not too much sales. And for Trezor Academy, um, we are mostly focused on the less privileged areas. So, for example, in South Africa, we have run the program in two major townships in Soweto and Khayelitsha. And in there, it's 100% custodial lightning because nothing else makes sense. But we try to plant the seed there that you can actually own your Bitcoin once you have, let's say, 100, 200 worth of Bitcoin in terms of dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there is a middle class, for example, in South Africa, and the Bitcoin adoption in South Africa is amazing from what I've seen when I visited the Adopting Bitcoin. You can actually, it's more of a Bitcoin country, I would say, than Salvador from what I've seen, because you can basically just live on Bitcoin without any issues. And since it's not a dollarized country and rand is really not it's not a good currency, and it's really not a good currency for making cross-border transactions. They have a very strong currency controls. So people understand quite naturally why you need to look for an alternative, and especially if you're middle class. From what I've seen, like with conversations with strangers that are middle class in South Africa, it's obvious to them that something like Bitcoin makes sense, and usually they are onboarded very quickly. So yeah, I think it will pick up. I believe Africa in a couple of years will be quite important in terms of on-chain devices, signing devices, and everything connected to that. But yeah, it will take some time. The purchasing power is definitely much lower than Europe or US, but it's an ascending region, definitely.
Yeah, and you mentioned uh, Nigeria having regulatory issues, which I need to do an interview with some folks there to get an update. But yeah, I understand there was a lot of pushback to that after, especially with their CBDC, they made it illegal. Like theoretically, they made Bitcoin crypto illegal, but then there was a lot of pushback to that, so that was reversed. But still very draconian and a lot of inflation there. But Nigeria, notwithstanding, some of the other places that you've been, are you seeing regulations at all get in the way of what you're doing, or is it just simply, since you're educating nonprofit and software based stuff, typically doesn't really factor in?
Yeah, we don't see too much obstacles. The major obstacle in terms of a lot of African countries is the customs. So what we do with the Trezor Academy meetups is we ship in some Bitcoin merch like t-shirts, like the camera blinders, and also devices, a couple of devices for each program for a giveaway. And usually the customs want some fee for that. In some places, I believe it was Nigeria, it was more than 100% worth of the devices, so that's very tough. And we're always trying to explain it's for a giveaway, there's no profit motive, it's a non-profit educational initiative, they don't care, they just want to have their share. So yeah, and that's what we've seen. The governments and the authorities are focused on like capturing this import-export fees in the form of customs. And otherwise, if you do any sort of like education in the country, we haven't seen any pushback against that. Even in places where nominally Bitcoin is sort of outlawed, nobody cares about education and stuff. They would care about companies starting to adopt Bitcoin and doing cross-border transactions in Bitcoin where the government and the tax authorities cannot touch that. We are not doing that. We are just providing education for regular people, and what they do with the education is basically up to them.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Okay. So, you mentioned it's going to take some time for the adoption. I agree. I think it's going to take some time for large scale Bitcoin adoption in the Northern Hemisphere as well. What else are your goals?
Yeah,
Yeah, for what you're doing down there.
maybe one important point is our ambition isn't to orange pill like the whole Africa. It's what we do is very small scale, especially for now. It's just 20 people per meetup, let's say. And there's more than 1 billion people in Africa, of course. So, I understand it. I understand it as sort of planting seeds in the local communities. Um, and you never know what grows out of that. Uh, my big wish is for some of the participants to maybe start a local podcast, start a local blog explaining Bitcoin and spreading the knowledge further. That's how Bitcoin got the initial traction in the early years in Europe and the US through physical meetups and through people getting really excited and talking to their families and to their friends. This is what's the viral potential of education. And yeah, that's why we are always looking for local Bitcoiners. I don't want to come into Africa and educate locals about Bitcoin because the contexts are different. In some places, the remittances are important. In some places, it's merchant adoption. In other places, it's just saving some purchasing power or having the ability to do digital payments if cash is dangerous, like in the South African townships. So yeah, spreading the seeds through local education. This is what I believe has the longest uh, potential or the best potential in the long term. And let's see, we'll see in a couple of years whether that came true. I think we are already starting to see some interesting stories around the Trezor Academy. You cannot stop that. You cannot stop the local education and the local spread of knowledge. Yeah, there's other interesting stories from what HRF is doing, for example, in northern Korea. You cannot stop education and the peer-to-peer exchange of knowledge, even in places like North Korea. So that's like what we're trying to do here, to just spread education in the most resilient and anti-fragile way possible.
What about Fediment? Are you hearing that be part of the conversation at all with what you're doing, particularly in Africa?
Yeah, I've seen them around. They're always at the African Bitcoin conferences. I'm a fan. I haven't actually used it myself, but it's more focused on like the African side of adoption. It might be a better alternative to the custodial Lightning wallets, definitely. Uh, so yeah, I'm a fan of that. Not too deeply researched, and let's see. I deeply respect Obi and what he's been doing in Bitcoin community for years. Yeah, and hopefully it will pick up in terms of real adoption.
Yeah, interesting. No, I mean the goals are extremely noble, and I completely agree. Your doesn't really matter how small the chipping away at the armor is. It's absolutely going to make a big difference in the end, and I just see that there's no other way. I remember Andreas Antonopoulos years ago saying something like, do you think J.P. Morgan Chase is going to succeed in places like Africa where you have non-existent driver's license and non-existent birth certificates to open up a bank account with, some U.S. style KYC? It's just it's tyrannical in
Yeah.
one way, and it's just completely unhelpful in many others. So I think it's totally natural, and I think it's going to be a great place for Bitcoin adoption, which a lot of people don't expect yet.
Yeah, and there's a nice term in connection with Africa, the leapfrogging, because in Africa, usually you leap from one technology across some technology to the latest one. So, for example, not a lot of people in Africa have landlines or personal computers. They went straight to the phones. And in many places, smartphones. It's not the case that all Africa is just feature phones. And in terms of financial services, it's the same thing. They're going from cash straight to Bitcoin Lightning without having like the banking services in the meantime. And
Mm.
yeah, as you say, the banking, the major banking brands or even the local banks, they won't bank like the townships or the remote villages, but you have some internet connectivity in most Africa, so you can do Lightning transactions. Or if you don't, you can do Machankura, which works over GSM. You can do Lightning over GSM with Machankura. So yeah, you don't need a bank in that case.
And then regarding the arch enemy of it all, the CBDC, obviously we talked about Nigeria a little bit. That was a touch point. That was a hot point for Africa. Do you hear that as being something that people talk about, or it's the government wants to do it, or people aren't sure what it means? What's the
Yeah,
topic
I
of
think
CBDC?
I think the e-Naira project, the Nigerian CBDC, was launched in 21 already, maybe. It's a couple of years. I remember the stat saying that after 1 year, around 1% adoption. So it was a huge failure. And then the Nigerian government started to double down on the CBDC. They like 2 years ago, they demonetized the highest value Naira banknote. It was a huge mess, sort of what happened in India a
Yep.
couple of years ago as well, because it's a cash-based economy. A lot of people had their savings and their balances in these high-denominated notes because it's a really crappy currency with a high inflation. So even the highest denomination note isn't worth that much. And then they scrapped that and gave people like a couple of weeks to get rid of those banknotes. The banks weren't supplied with the replacement banknotes. There were huge. It was a huge mess. People died. Horrible, horrible mess. And unfortunately, the government isn't easing up too much. They started to go after the exchange operators. There were two people from Binance arrested a couple of months ago in Nigeria. One of them escaped. The second one, I don't know. The street vendors, like the street exchange guys, they are coming after them as well. And still with the idea to push the CBDC on the population, which just doesn't make any sense. Nobody wants it. The rate of adoption of Bitcoin and stablecoins is one of the highest in Nigeria. So yeah, unfortunately, you have this complete detachment from actual reality in terms of what the government wants to push on the population and what the population actually needs and wants. That you can see that in many places in Africa. Yeah, otherwise I'm not following too strongly on the Nigerian situation right now. Just these couple of news pieces that I've seen. Abu Bakr Nur Khalil is definitely the guy to talk to about this. He's also contributing to Forbes. Yeah, Nigeria is scary in some aspects. It's one of the largest countries in the world, over 200 million people, and it's full-on financial tyranny. And if Bitcoin doesn't succeed there, then it would be quite bad news for everybody, because that's precisely the environment that Bitcoin needs to succeed in,
Yeah.
and where it's being tested that it actually can succeed in a very hostile environment.
Yeah. I mention it a lot, but it's one of the indicators that I keep tracking, and I am surprised because, even in the discussions that we're having today, we talk about how everyone's going more digital. People are scared of the theft and the crime that does happen with cash. But people don't realize they're still printing a lot of cash. I mean, it's over $9 trillion equivalent of cash.
Yeah.
US has about 2.2 more, 2.2 plus trillion of that. That means there's almost 7 trillion in other currencies: euros, yen, yuan, Swiss francs, and it's still growing. You don't see it, but it's still growing. They still print. So the narrative is often different than the reality, and I'm not quite sure where that will lead us. But it's they've made it clear that they want the control of the CBDC. But cash is a 1,000-year-old technology. It's going to be hard to wean people off of it, especially in the underprivileged part of the world.
Yeah, also in some places like Czech Republic, we still use quite a lot of cash. You also see, it's interesting, you can see card-only shops and cash-only shops. You can see both of that in Czech Republic. And usually the cash-only shops are more like libertarian-leaning, let's say, or conservative.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like a political statement. But you can do both. And yeah, I don't see Czech Republic being cashless anytime soon. People understand cash and its benefits quite well in here.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a very interesting fact that you just can't really look away from, and most people don't think about it, or they hear the narrative, but it's the facts on the ground are kind of literally different. Very interesting, Joseph. What else should we talk about today? Have we run the gamut on a lot of your latest projects?
Right. Let's see. Yeah, there's always so much around Africa and Bitcoin adoption. I think, like in general, a lot of people don't realize how broad the term Bitcoin adoption is, because if you're in Europe, if you're in Germany or UK or the US, Bitcoin adoption for you is most likely going to be just the store of value, because that's the thing that you're missing. You don't need Bitcoin for payments too much. In places like Africa, the medium of exchange is usually quite important. There's nothing wrong with custodial Lightning. It's still a Bitcoin adoption with just the knowledge that you should progress to self-custody over long term. So that's totally fine. Yeah, merchant adoption. It's very interesting to see the contrast between merchant adoption in Europe, like through what 21 and 21 initiatives are doing in Europe, where it's sort of like altruistic and political philosophy motivated, and in South Africa, where it's a necessity to start adopting Bitcoin because cash is dangerous, rent is crap, and Lightning is easy. It's yeah. I think Bitcoin has its own has its place in all the countries in the world, but the adoption just looks different because you have different set of problems, and there's nothing wrong with just stacking Bitcoin and hodling Bitcoin. There's nothing wrong with spending Bitcoin. You just need to do you just need to solve your own problems, and these problems can be very different in different places in the world.
Yeah, well, listen, I fully agree, Joseph. I think that you're very much on the right track. Bitcoin means a lot of things to a lot of people. A lot of us have said that over the years, and there's just no one answer. And I think it's fantastic to see the interesting angle that you all are doing at Satoshi Labs, especially in the developing world. So listen, yeah, want to be sensitive to your time here. Maybe as we get close to the end, any final thoughts? What are you guys looking forward to in the next couple months or the rest of the year?
Yeah, sure. So just check out the Academy webpage. It's academy.trezor.io. Also, you can check out Vexel, the non-KYC peer-to-peer app. It's vexel.it. And I would say in terms of learning more about Bitcoin adoption in the global south, Alex Gladstein is the man to follow. Ed Gladstein on Twitter and other places, and what the Human Rights Foundation is doing. It really changed my perception of Bitcoin a couple of years ago. And yeah, if you understand what's happening in the global south, in Africa, South America, Central America, in terms of Bitcoin adoption, you quickly realize how out of touch with reality a lot of the Bitcoin critics are, because in some aspect, it doesn't really matter that much what happens in Europe or US in terms of Bitcoin adoption. It's still like a nice thing to have for a lot of people in Europe and US to have a Bitcoin as part of their quote unquote portfolio. But in the global south, it's sort of a survival tool for a lot of people. So yeah, it provided me with a sort of peace of mind when I encounter any Bitcoin critics. I just say, okay, might not work for you, but it actually sort of saves lives for a lot of people down there in the global south nowadays. So it doesn't really matter what you think. Because it's an actual useful tool right now, and it doesn't matter what some ivory tower economist thinks in the West. So that's one of the most beautiful things about Bitcoin adoption.
A wonderful message, Joseph. We've seen it so often, these horrible, just droning academics for 15 years now. We're going to see it again in the future, but a wonderful message to leave it with. I think follow Trezor Academy, follow Human Rights Foundation. We'll link to all them in the show notes. Listen, Joseph, really, really appreciate it. All the best to you as you go on for the rest of this year and in the future with Trezor Academy. Let me know what I can do to help you guys. And not all, I'm sure, feels the same way, but it's really wonderful to hear what you guys are doing. So thanks a lot for joining.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Keto.
Thank you guys, and see you in Prague in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Take care. See ya.